Hi, good day everyone. For today's lesson, we will tackle about indigenous people and their language. So what is indigenous people and their language? Indigenous people derive their identities, values, and knowledge system from their interaction with their territories, with their forest or sea. Indigenous language, it is the language that is native to the region and spoken by indigenous people. It's shaped by their environment, and it is their attempts to describe their surrounding that forms the basis of their unique tongues. And it has been reduced to the status of a minority language. Why? Maybe it may not be recognized as the national language, and maybe it may have fallen out of use due to the language death. And the reasons are often maybe political, economic, or even their cultural in nature. For instance, the speakers of a minority language may decide that it is better for their children's future to teach them a language that is tied to economic success. And that's why being indigenous person in the 21st means despite of everything they still being able to dream a future in which everyone, yes, everyone supports them, the indigenous people's human rights and self-determination. So guys, we must value their language, traditional knowledge, histories and more, and as well as their way of life that lend richness in diversity to Philippine culture and the society that we are all part of. Next slide.
The Indigenous People's Language. So what is Indigenous People's Language? So for Indigenous People's languages, not only identify their origin or membership in a community, but they also carry the ethical values of their ancestors and the indigenous knowledge systems that make them one with the land and are crucial to their survival and to the hopes and aspiration of their youth. So, let's identify their origin or membership in a community. So, indigenous communities, peoples, and nations are those that having a historical continuity with pre-invasion and pre-colonial societies that develop on their territories and consider themselves distinct from other sectors of the societies and now prevailing in those territories or part of them. And the term indigenous derives from the late Latin indigenous and indigena, which is native, and from the Old Latin indu, that is derived from the archaic endu, a cognate of the Greek endu, meaning in within, and the Latin meaning to beget, from the root gene, meaning to produce or give birth. So carry the ethical values of their ancestors. Some of these indigenous peoples emerged from early waves of Malay or Proto-Malay migrants. So about 27 of them, such as Aita, are Negritos that were already long established in the Philippines. They are thought to be the descendants of the earliest settlers to the archipelago who may have migrated there.
The benefits: we have access to traditional territories, the rights to customary sustainable use of natural resources, and living indigenous languages. So access to traditional territories. It respect, preserve and maintain knowledge, innovations and practices of indigenous and local communities, embodying traditional lifestyles relevant for the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, and promote their wider application with the approval and involvement of the holders of such knowledge, innovations and practices. Lands, territories, and related resource rights are of fundamental importance to indigenous peoples since they constitute the basis of their economic livelihood and are the sources of their spiritual, cultural, and social identity. For the rights to customary sustainable use of natural resources are central to human well-being. We cannot live without the clean air we breathe, the plants we eat, or the water we drink. We need natural resources to put roofs over our heads and heat our homes. We need them to survive and to thrive. The Indigenous Knowledge System and Practices, or IKSPS, have been proven to contribute to the sustainability and productivity of many ecosystems, examples of which include the rice terraces. The Banawe Rice Terraces is a Filipino hagdan-hagdang palayan ng Banawe. Are terraces that were carved into the mountains of Banawe, Ifugao in the Philippines, by the ancestors of the Igorot people. So Igorot is one of the indigenous. The Igorots of the Cordilleras are among the indigenous peoples of the Philippines. Next is living indigenous languages. For indigenous people, languages not only identify their origin or membership in a community, they also carry the ethical values of their ancestors, that indigenous knowledge system that make them one with the land and are crucial to their survival and to the hopes and aspirations of their youth.
In addition, as indigenous people are the holders of unique language, knowledge system, beliefs, and as well as vital understanding of natural resources management strategies, and have a special relation to and use their ancestral land. So sa Philippines, naay law na gikuan para ana, and that is the Indigenous Right Act of 1997, Republic Act number 8371. So, as a group of people or homogeneous societies, indigenous people identify by self-ascription and ascription by others, who have continuously lived as organized, community-bounded and defined territory, and occupied, possessed, and utilized such as territory since time immemorial under claims of ownership, sharing common bands of language, customs, traditions, and their other distinct cultural traits, or who have become historically differentiated from the majority of the Filipino.
Next, the other benefits of indigenous language. So first, we have here the close the gap between law and practice. So they were applying it to ensure land rights are protected and higher positions were able to lend for projects that affect indigenous people. The second one is repositories of knowledge connection to digital technology. So currently, indigenous peoples are utilizing tools such as video conferencing technology, digitization of documents, and radio broadcasts over the internet. So the majority of these technologies are used to preserve and promote indigenous culture, traditions, history, and human rights advocacy. Further, the internet is used by indigenous groups for emailing, chat rooms, radio stations, video conferencing, and simple information gathering by looking at websites. Today, there are multiple organizations dedicated to the utilization of the technology given to repositories of knowledge connection to indigenous language. So now let's move on to our next topic, which is the benefits of giving attention to indigenous languages. So, in the benefits, it's central to the idea of giving attention and recognition to indigenous language that it will strengthen indigenous culture and identify which will lead to improvements in standard Australian English competency and socioeconomic factors, including improved measurements of well-being. So it focuses moreover on the language of the indigenous people, which help them to strengthen our culture, the culture of indigenous people and their identity. So the next one is to early teaching of indigenous languages offers a gateway to improve engagement with and belief from mainstream education, It needs to be done through the implementation of well-resourced and supported indigenous language teaching programs. So as I've reported a while ago, that it is repositories of knowledge connection to digital technology. So in our education today, the indigenous language are well preserved and well organized by the people.
And that's all for today's lesson. I hope you've learned something. Thank you.